Yeah.
Technically, it's still a word.
Yeah, my sister was telling me one time, her friend wrote an essay.
You have 30,000 words.
German.
I have one
Yeah,
All right. So you guys should have the notes today. All right. This week is going to talk about Greek mythology. I guess you guys know already. Final for this. So we'll have one more chapter to cover.
That's
so
weird.
actually maybe give it a little more time. All right. So does anybody, and I always kind of ask this question, is anybody taking mythology right now?
I already took it last
You already took it, so this is going to be like kind of clip notes kind of stuff. And in reality, I probably should phase this out. I keep on saying that. Because when I started teaching world history, we were in a transition. For a long time, there was a guy named Mr. Adams that taught mythology here. If your parents came through here, or he was amazing. Actually, he just basically just tells
My
stories.
dad had him.
Did it? Yeah.
He talked about how
He would just stand there and just basically just kind of like his memory was amazing, and it wasn't just Greek mythology; it was Egyptian mythology, it was Norse mythology. After he retired, he would go to grade schools and stuff like that, and like kind of just basically tell stories. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But when I started teaching world history, we were in a transition. That was before Miss Mute kind of brought back kind of Greek mythology. So, in reality, I probably should kind of phase this out, but I've kind of kept it in here. And there's a section on the test where we're going to kind of match up kind of like gods and goddesses and that. But when we talk about like these civilizations and their mythology, we're basically talking about their religions, their belief systems, if you will. But when we talk about like a myth, like what does a myth imply?
It's a
It
lie.
may or may
It's not
not
real.
be.
It may or not be real, all right? In many cases, these kind of myths are basically a way for these this is a kind of like scientific age or whatever like that to kind of explain the world around them, to explain why certain things happen, why the sun rises, or like creation stories and stuff, right? And so, and the thing also about kind of like mythologies here is that you don't find a lot of people kind of like worshiping at the altar of Zeus. All right, because a lot of the kind of major world religions today, some of them like kind of predating this, like Hinduism, and such. They all have like kind of sacred texts, right? In many cases, a lot of these kind of story mythology, particularly, were basically stories that are passed down through oral traditions, right? And so, kind of our standard kind of Webster dictionary definition of Greek mythology is as such: a set of diverse tales told by the ancient Greeks, a lot of exploits of gods and goddesses. But heroes, we'll talk about on Thursday. We'll talk about kind of heroes in that sense, all right? The Iliad and the Odyssey, kind of they talk about heroes and that concept of a reap. But the gods and goddesses kind of play a role in that directly in many cases. But it's a way for the Greeks to kind of explain the world around them, to explain not just kind of natural elements, but also their kind of like human nature to a certain extent, all right? And so a lot of these cultures, they have, in many cases, they have origin stories, if you will. And the Greeks are kind of no exception with that. So according to kind of like Greek mythology here, everything kind of starts with an entity referred to as chaos, right? Chaos is kind of one of these kind of non-gender specific kind of entities. And again, a lot of times we get, in the Greeks develop kind of like, Western civilization really, and we get a number of kind of terms and stuff like that from the Greeks, if you will. Today, when we talk about chaos, we talk about something that's just like kind of like crazy and just kind of like, not in control. And from the Greek mythology, kind of chaos kind of brings things to a center, if you will. Now, from chaos produces two entities that are kind of represent kind of quintessential male-female, if you will. Mother Earth, Gaia, if you will, and then Eros, love, right? And they were responsible for producing other kind of divine kind of entities, if you will. Now, next chapter, when I talk about Roman history and stuff like that, I'm not going to talk much about Roman mythology because I've already talked about it with Greek mythology. The Romans are biters. They're going to bite off a lot of aspects of Greek mythology, just change the names. Prime example here, though, with Eros. All right. In later mythology, Eros is often portrayed as the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and that. He's usually portrayed as a young man. When the Greeks get a hold of Eros, they kind of turn him into this cherubic kind of baby with arrows that she shoots to bring people together. And we know him as what? Cupid, right? Okay, so but they kind of change a little bit of the story, kind of change the name, but kind of keeps the same kind of concept here. Now, from chaos produced night. Well, Gaia in one story produces with with Eros, and one story without Eros. The first one called primordial deity, and that's Uranus or Uranus. All right, I say Uranus usually because before I got a full-time teaching gig, I subbed for like 5 years around the area. And there was one day I subbed a 6th grade science class at a Catholic school in Belleville that my kids later went to. And I'm teaching about the planets. And this one kid raises his hand and he goes, "Hey, Mr. Sub, is there any life on Uranus?" Class fell out. I lost him. All right. So I basically said, "All right, get out your books, turn the page, whatever, stuff like that." I don't know. Does anyone here go to Catholic school? Anyone go to Catholic school? All right. You probably wouldn't understand this then. So I didn't say anything of it. I just kind of chalked it up. The kid won. It's just one of those things. Kid was consumed with Catholic guilt. Apparently, he dry snitched on himself. Though I was eating lunch with the principal said, "So-and-so's going to apologize to you." I was like, "Well, I didn't tell anybody about it." So the kid, like 2 minutes after she told me that, goes and apologizes. And I told him, I said, "I appreciate the apology, but never lose your comedic timing because you kind of took the opportunity there." So that's why we say Uranus, all right? Because, whatever. And so probably Mr. White probably talked about, you have different tiers of deities and all these kind of mythologies here, all right? And so Uranus with his mother, wife, Gaia, produces 12 kind of giants, godlike giants referred to as the Titans. All right. And so like the football team, the Tennessee Titans, takes its name as such because Nashville is often referred to as the Athens of the South. If you ever go to Nashville, they have a replica of the Parthenon there. All right. There's an Athens, Georgia, but I don't know why they would take offense to that. And then also it produces the kind of one-eyed kind of entities referred to as Cyclops. All right. Later stories, Cyclops are kind of like there's one famous Cyclops, Polyphemus, is told in the story of the Odyssey. All right, but there's a constant theme kind of throughout mythology here of the son supplanting or replacing the father. So the youngest of the Titans, Cronus, decides that his father's time is up. All right, and so with his siblings, essentially they're going to try to take over. So Uranus decides the best way to kind of thwart this coup d'etat is to force them back into their mother. All right. I don't know how the biology works with that. Needless to say, that plan doesn't work. All right. And Cronus kind of thwarts that plan. All right. Eventually, this leads to a kind of a battle. And to add insult to injury, Cronus essentially emasculates his father, basically severs his genitals. Now, this may be a story that the Greeks got from the Hittites. There was the same story in which there was a Hittite deity named Kiberti who was kind of created after Kiberti created the Teshub. After he severed his father, the god Anu, who dates back to the Sumerians, his genitals. All right. In a later story, the blood from that said severed genitals that reaches the sea produces the goddess Aphrodite. Her name means foam risen. In another later story, Aphrodite is the daughter of Zeus. The blood that reaches the soil produces the Erinyes, the Furies, the three entities, female entities that torment those who kill their family members, if you will. Needless to say, Cronus is the kind of basically the ruler of the universe. He supplants his father. However, there's a similar story that's related with him. Now, this is a Renaissance painting painted by two painters, Vasari and Giberi, in the Plaza Vecchio in Florence, which kind of shows Cronus kind of like emasculating his father, if you will. All right. And then what ends up happening here is Cronus has a similar situation where he gets word from an oracle that, like his father, one of his kids is going to supplant him. So him and his sister wife, Rhea, have 6 children. All right. So Cronus takes kind of the idea that if you want a job done right, you got to do it yourself. So he decides that he's not going to force the kids back into their mother. He's going to swallow them. All right. So he's swallowing kids 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. That's, and if you've ever like held an infant child and a stone, they're basically the same thing. So what ends up happening is Rhea has a pang of consciousness, and instead of basically giving him the last child, she wraps it up in a stone up in like baby clothes, with swaddling clothes, and he swallows it. That's done. All right. There's a famous painting by the Spanish artist Goya called "Saturn Eats His Children." You have to look it up. It's pretty intense. All right. So what ends up happening is this child ends up going to basically kind of is raised on the island of Crete by this kind of goat with special milk and such. And when he becomes an adult, he comes back and basically his father. That's Zeus. All right. And so Zeus, apparently in one story, gives Cronus a kind of a drink that's kind of like ipecac, kind of like forces the children up. They throw up, of course, and then there's a battle between Zeus and his siblings and Cronus and his siblings, the Titans, with the exception of two. One of the Titans that sides with Zeus is Prometheus, who gives man fire, right? And was later punished by that. And then eventually Zeus and his siblings win. Now, they don't go as far as emasculating his father, but he does send Cronus to the depths of the underworld, a place called Tartarus. Now, later in stories, Zeus and Cronus basically reconcile, and Cronus is given kind of an honorary title as kind of god of the kind of skies, if you will. This ushers in the deities that are basically kind of like in the everyday kind of life of the Greeks are the ones that are the important ones, the Olympians. All right. These are the 12, sometimes 13 major gods of Greek mythology. All right. These are the ones that have the most cities dedicated in their honor. These are the ones that have temples dedicated to them and such. They're essentially Zeus and his siblings, and then the offspring of Zeus, some of the offspring of Zeus. Now, they're called the Olympians because they're based on the on Mount Olympus, which was the highest point in Greece. It just made sense. There, they feasted on ambrosia, drank a special nectar, and stuff like that. All right. So this is kind of an image here. The head of the pantheon of the Olympians is Zeus. He is the ruler of the Olympians, but also the god of sky, the kind of protector of mankind. However, he can be very vindictive. And the thing about this is that in many cases, these gods are not infallible. Right? The Greeks kind of create their gods in almost a reflection of themselves. They engage in affairs. They can get angry. They can get jealous. They have every type of emotion that human beings have. And Zeus is a prime example of that. He can get involved. If you upset Zeus, he is likely to send a flood or a major famine to basically kind of like affect you. All right. He's also famous for his dalliances, right? His affairs, if you will. And that's a way for a lot of Greek men to kind of justify their bad behavior to a certain extent. Does anybody know Zeus's Roman name? It's another planet. Jupiter. Yeah. All right. Usually, if he's portrayed in kind of human form, he's usually portrayed as like a Jim Morrison-like character, if you will. Like I said, he's really famous for his numerous affairs. And so much so they have to create a chart for it. So if there was a Maury Povich show on Mount Olympus, Zeus would always be on there, and they'd always open up the envelope, and he's like, Zeus, you are the father. And then like whoever would get up in his face, and they'd be like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to take care of my kids and stuff like that. He doesn't really take care of his kids, though. He's not a great father in that sense. So on the left side here is his divine unions, his union with goddesses, some of them as sisters, titans and such. Some produce other deities. And then over here are the ones with mortals. Now, with the ones with mortals, Zeus doesn't appear in his godlike form. He can't do that because they will die. There's one story in which he does appear later, and that does affect him. We'll talk about that. But he appears like with Leda, right? Who is the mother of Helen, who is the Helen of Troy, right? Who was in the face that launched 1,000 ships, and Clytemnestra, who is the wife of Agamemnon. He appears as a swan, all right? In other stories, he appears as a horse. In one story, he appears as a serpent, all right? Another story, he appears as a shower of gold. I don't know how the hell that works, but it appears. And then in a lot of cases, he appears as the husband of these women, all right? And so in many cases, like I said, he's like kind of famous for kind of his various, and it's a way for Greeks, particularly men, to kind of explain their kind of behavior to a certain extent. Now, he is married, though, right? And the woman that he is constantly stepping out on is his sister wife, Hera. All right, Hera is the queen of the gods. She's also, ironically, the goddess of marriage and the protector of married women, which shows that the Greeks have a kind of ironic sense of humor to a certain degree. In many stories, Hera is constantly trying to catch Zeus and his dalliances here. She's often very vindictive in not only to the women that Zeus has affairs with, some men as well, but also to the offspring. Like famously, the story of Hercules. She basically casts a spell on him in which he kills his entire family. Then he has to go out and compete these 12 laborers and such. There's another story in which Zeus is out having an affair with a nymph, which were these wood kind of like deities, these female deities. And there was one story in which he was out with the nymph, and this other nymph basically was named Echo. And what ends up happening is that she's trying to run interference for Zeus. So Hera goes to Echo, have you seen Zeus? And she's like, have you seen, like, just repeats what Hera says. So once Hera gets wind of this, like, I know what you're saying here. So she casts a spell on Echo, in which Echo can only talk and repeat what people say. She can't say anything else. So that's how the Greeks kind of explain the concept of an echo, if you will. All right. So the only story which Hera's really, I think I could think of that Hera is like kind of like a positive force would be the story of Jason the Argonauts. All right. Other than that, she's somewhat of kind of like, she can be pretty vindictive to a certain extent. Does anybody know her Roman name? Do you remember that?
Oh,
It's on the tip of your tongue, I know. I can't tell because you're wearing a mask.
Juno?
Juno, boom, good job. All right. So here's Hera. All right. At one point, she actually tries to overthrow Zeus, and that doesn't work out well. And probably the most famous of the Olympians, other than Zeus, is Poseidon, who is the god of the sea. Makes sense. The Aegean is kind of a main part of the Greek civilization there. Most of the temples dedicated to Poseidon are on the coastlines. There's a famous one called Sonion, which is just kind of like north of Athens there. Poseidon is also a god associated with earthquakes. A lot of times bulls and horses would be basically kind of offered to him. The story of the Minotaur is which when King Minos was supposed to, Poseidon presided him with this majestic bull. Minos was supposed to sacrifice that to Poseidon. The bull was so nice that he didn't want to do that. And then in turn, Poseidon cast a spell on Minos' wife, and she fell in love with the said bull. All right, that's what produced the Minotaur. All right, in the story, she had Minos' engineer create like a box that made her look like a cow, I guess, and so that's how that works. If you're ever wondering the biology of that, he's also the father of Orion, the Polyphemus, the Cyclops in the story of the Odyssey, which Odysseus blinds, and that's why Odysseus has a hard time getting back to Ithaca. Pegasus, which was the winged horse, that was in the story of the hero Perseus. Pegasus was born when Perseus severed the head of Medusa, the Gorgon. Now, unfortunately, now people don't tend to focus on this. Medusa wasn't always a hideous Gorgon. Poseidon forced himself upon her when she was a maiden in the temple of the goddess Athena. And Athena instead punished Medusa instead of Poseidon there. All right. Does anyone know the Roman name for Poseidon?
Neptune.
Neptune, right. If you watch SpongeBob there. He's usually associated with the Triton there. Then the other brother, Hades, the god of the underworld. According to legend, he drew the short straw and got the underworld. So he's the god of the dead as well, associated with precious metals, if you will. When Christianity makes its way to Greece, there is a kind of a connecting kind of Hades because Hades was also known as the underworld. Hades with hell, and kind of Hades himself with Satan to a certain degree. But everybody in the Greek kind of world, when they died, they went to the underworld. It was just there was different kind of areas of the underworld. So when people would die, a lot of times they would put coins on their eyes. Do you guys know why they did that?
It was the payment to Chiron.
Yeah, Chiron, the ferryman. All right, to get across the river Styx. All right. So again, he's not necessarily evil, but he's not necessarily kind of like celebrated either. He's kind of a dark character, if you will. All right, but there was that way to kind of make that connection to when Christianity made its way to Greece with Hades and hell. All right. This is him along with the kind of three-headed dog that guards the underworld. Remember what that was called?
Cerberus.
Cerberus. Good. Cerberus was one of the Hercules had to basically capture Cerberus in one of his labors, if you will. And then a sister to Zeus and Poseidon and Hades, Hestia, which is the goddess of the hearth. The hearth was just a ceremonial fire that you kept burning. Hestia is probably more famous from a Roman name, which is Vesta. And in the Roman Forum, there was a temple dedicated to Vesta, which was basically, the fire was basically monitored by 6 virgin girls called the Vestal Virgins. All right. She is not that interesting in many cases. Sometimes she's replaced on Mount Olympus. But anytime you had a meal, before a meal, you made a prayer to Hestia, and then basically people maintain the kind of what they call the home fires. That's kind of dedicated to her. There's Hestia. And then another sister is Demeter, which is the agricultural goddess. She's the goddess of grain and harvest. In one story, her and Zeus have a daughter, Persephone. And in that story, Persephone was out one day in a meadow, and Hades saw her. Needless to say, it's his niece, but he was kind of smitten with her and kidnapped her to the underworld to make her the queen of the underworld. In that story, Demeter was basically distraught, and as a result, nothing grew. So what ends up happening is Zeus sends the messenger god down there to negotiate with Hades. Hades agrees that he will let kind of Persephone go back up to visit her mother. However, before she leaves, Persephone eats a fruit that's associated with the underworld. You guys know what that is? The pomegranate. So she eats a pomegranate seed. As a result, that's basically a kind of a contract. So she spends half the year with her mother and then half the year in the underworld. So when she's with her mother, things are good. The crops grow and they're harvested. When she's in the underworld, that's when nothing grows. And that's the winter time. So that's a way for the Greeks to kind of explain the change of seasons. There was a kind of a cult or a kind of a secret society dedicated to Demeter called the Eleusinian Mysteries. That was kind of like the most famous thing that's kind of associated with Demeter or Demeter. All right, there she is in her statue. Now we're getting into the kind of the offspring of Zeus. The first one is Ares, the god of war. He is the son of Zeus and Hera, one of the few that kind of produces from that union there. He is not very popular though. All right, like I believe in the Iliad they mention Ares as the one who basically covers his bed in the skin of men and stuff like that. He's kind of a necessary evil. The only city-state that was of prominence that he was the patron deity was the city of Thebes. But there is a hill, the Areopagus, which is basically dedicated to Ares there. But when the Romans, you guys know what the Roman name equivalent of? There's another planet, Mars, okay? The Romans elevate Mars to a higher status than the Greeks elevate Ares. Why do you think that is? What about the Romans? What did the Romans create? An empire. How do you get an empire like that? Through conquering people. So Mars is going to be elevated in status more so than Ares is in the Greeks. All right. That's a strategically placed fig leaf if I've ever seen one. All right. And then there's twins here. Apollo. Now Apollo's mother is the Titan Leto. When Hera found out that Leto was pregnant, she basically forbid Leto to give birth on land or on sea. The only place that she was able to give birth was an island called Dilios, which is off by kind of the island of Mykonos today. And so Dilios is still to this day, you see like kind of things dedicated to Apollo on there. At one point, the Athenians kept a treasury there, and they created something called the Delian League, which we'll talk a little bit later. Apollo is the god of sun, not to be confused with Helios, which was an older deity that's associated with the sun. But he's also the god of prophecy after slaying the Python, the Pythia, at Delphi. Music is associated with the first one to kind of play the lyre, healing, kind of medicine, and to a certain extent. He's the quintessential young man, the guy kind of into almost everything. His endeavors are kind of like transcend that. And also he's one of the few Greek gods that when the Romans get a hold of him, they don't change his name. He remains Apollo to the Romans, if you will. All right. And so this is him with the lyre. He was also had a chariot that is going to be stolen by his brother, and I'll kind of explain that. I believe also like they claim he was the first one to win the Olympics. All right. This is the Oracle of Delphi. And so people would go there to get basically their fortune, kind of like a prophecy there. There was a young woman they referred to as the Pythia. Sometimes at one point it was an older woman, but you would go there and when we were there in 2007, they believed that she would go underneath this temple and there would be methane fumes, right? Because there's a kind of a fault line in the area that she would kind of get kind of loopy. There was one story in which they would take hallucinogenic leaves or whatever, like in a kind of a drink concoction. So you would ask the Pythia a question. She would basically kind of emerge, kind of speaking in tongues almost, and then you have somebody try to interpret that. They were kind of vague and stuff, but they weren't always the right answer. Like, so for example, there's a state called Lydia, which is in Asia Minor, where we get the concept of coins from. They were the first ones to kind of develop the concept of coins. The king of Lydia famously went to the Oracle of Delphi and asked the oracle if he should go to war with the Persians, who were kind of encroaching into his territory there. The Pythia basically stated, if you go to war with the Persians, a great kingdom will fall. So he thought, okay, great, I'll go. I mean, this is good luck. That kingdom was his kingdom, all right? So it's not always the answer that you get, really, that you kind of want there. But 9 months out of the year, Apollo is the one who basically kind of monitors the Oracle of Delphi, all right? And then his twin sister is Artemis. She is the goddess of the hunt. She is also considered the goddess of childbirth, although she is a virgin. One of her jobs as a goddess of childbirth is to give a kind of quick, painless death for women who are kind of suffering through childbirth. You have to keep in mind, in the ancient world, giving birth to children was particularly dangerous. All right. She's usually depicted with wild animals like stag and deer and stuff like that. She is mentioned in the Iliad. She is the one that she demands a sacrifice from Agamemnon. And so Agamemnon, to ensure victory, Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter. Right, which later will come in a later story, comes to haunt Agamemnon, because when he returns from the victory in Troy, his wife remembers that and she ends up killing him. All right, so him and her and Apollo are basically twins. I believe her Roman name is Diana. I think it's Diana. Yeah. So that's Artemis. This is a Rubens painting, excuse me, showing Artemis. And then there's Hermes, who is the son of Zeus and another Titan. Hermes is the messenger god, right? He's the one who transcends the underworld. He can go to the underworld, like he went to in the story of Persephone and goes and negotiates with Hades. He's also the god of commerce. You make it like if you're going on a journey with trade. If you're a trader, you make a kind of an offering or prayer to Hermes. He's a trickster deity as well. In the one story, he stole Apollo's chariot. He's the one who stole the chariot on the day he was born, mind you. Steals his brother's chariot and tries to like hide the fact by having it go backwards. Needless to say, he crashes it. To make up for that, he gives Apollo the lyre, which kind of associates Apollo with music. So Hermes usually is kind of portrayed as a young man, although just 3 days ago, I was reading that there's a archaeology world website. They found a bust that I believe is Hermes as an older man. All right. But he's usually kind of portrayed as kind of a young man. He's more famous from his Roman name. If you ever go to like a florist, like and you want to buy flowers, you see the FTD logo. His Roman equivalent is on there. That's Mercury. All right, so he's like kind of with winged sandals, if you will. Athena is the daughter of Zeus and the Titan Metis. Athena has multiple things that she's associated with. She's the goddess of domestic arts and crafts, like weaving. She's also the goddess of war, so she kind of transcends. She has kind of like both that. She's the goddess of wisdom, right? The owl is kind of like associated with her. The city of Athens is named after her. She's known as the Parthenos, the maiden. So the Parthenon is the temple, and the Acropolis is dedicated to her. Athena got that from having a competition with Poseidon. She provided the olive tree to the Athenians as a result of that. Now, she has an interesting birth. She is born fully grown from the forehead of Zeus. How the hell does that happen? We'll check it out. So the story is that Zeus was given a kind of a prophecy that Metis will have a son that will supplant him, but it's like he did to his father and his father did to his grandfather. So instead of just not messing with Metis, which he can't do that, he's Zeus, he decides, well, Metis is basically pregnant with Athena, that he's going to swallow Metis, because that always works. All right, so the story goes, he swallows Metis. 9 months later, he has a splitting headache. It's cracked open, and boom, out is Athena, fully born, mind you. She's fully grown, in full armor. All right, and then in later stories, she becomes one of his favorites. So Athena, like I said, Athena, there's a lot of stories that are related to her. This is how she looked like when she was born, which seems like it would be a very difficult birth. This is a symposia, which is a kind of a wine jug. This was in the Roman times, so this is Jupiter, which is Zeus' equivalent, giving birth to Minerva, which is Athena's name in Roman mythology, if you will. All right, and then the dude who cracked open Zeus' skull was basically the god of fire and metalwork. That's Hephaestus. Hephaestus in one story is the son of Hera and Zeus. Another story, he's conceived by Hera without a male partner as a way to get back at Zeus. A lot of times he's referred to as the lame god because he kind of walks with a limp. One story is that he was thrown off Mount Olympus by Zeus for interjecting himself into the kind of argument between Zeus and Hera. But in a lot of stories, even Hera is kind of like appalled by him. I feel bad for the dude because he's constantly basically trying. He's married to Aphrodite in one story, and she's constantly fooling around on him with Ares, his brother. So in one story, he catches them with a net and stuff like that. But he's the one who makes all the armor for the gods. In the Iliad, there's a kind of a passage there where he makes the armor for Achilles. All right. His workshop is believed to be underneath Mount Etna in Sicily. So it was kind of a way to kind of explain volcanic activity. Mount Etna is still active. It's just about 10 years ago, there was a major kind of explosion there on Etna, if you will. His Roman name is Vulcan, all right? And so there's him kind of making the shield for Achilles there. And then the last one who sometimes replaces Hestia is Dionysus, the god of wine, the god of party, right? Dionysus, 3 months out of the year, oversees the Oracle of Delphi, usually the summer months. Dionysus also is associated with theater. There was a cult dedicated to Dionysus, which was all women. That was a secret cult, and basically that's where they believe the kind of the origins of theater are. So a lot of like later theater festivals and stuff like that are dedicated to Dionysus. So usually Dionysus is shown with like kind of having kind of grapes around there. This is the kind of the cult to Dionysus overlooking at Delphi. Now, I know we're done with those, so I'll just tell you one more story. He's often referred to as being twice born. Right? And this is a story where his mother was a mortal by the name of Semele. All right. When Hera found out that Semele was pregnant with Dionysus from Zeus, she shapeshifted into a woman, an older woman, and befriended Semele. And when Semele was telling her who her baby daddy was, Hera, as this old woman, said, well, if he really loves you, he would basically appear to you in his godlike form. Now, if he appears in godlike form, that would kill her. But Zeus made a promise to Semele that he'd give her anything she asked for. So when Semele sees Zeus next, she's like, will you appear in your godlike form? Instead of Zeus saying, you'll die, he says, well, okay. And so he appears, and she basically incinerates. She goes, before she completely burns up, Zeus takes the Dionysus as the kind of the infant there and shoves him in his thigh, which is the logical sequence. All right. And then a few months later, he's born from the thigh of Zeus. So that's why he's referred to as being twice born, if you will. All right. So thanks for letting me tell you guys these ridiculous stories. All right. And like I said, we have a section on the test where we kind of match up Greek gods and goddesses from the Olympians. On Thursday, I'll talk about heroes and some other